Twin girls from Virginia vanished on a cruise ship holiday, leaving their single mother's world torn apart. But 10 months later, a suitcase washes up on the shore, and what they find inside leaves everyone in shock. Rachel Marin sat in the dimly lit living room of her small Charlottesville home, surrounded by the remnants of a 10-month investigation that had yielded nothing but dead ends. Missing persons flyers with the smiling faces of her twin daughters were scattered across her coffee table, some with corners curled from handling, others faded from sunlight that streamed through the blinds she rarely adjusted anymore. Police reports and case files formed precarious stacks on her desk, a collection she'd read so many times she could recite passages from memory. Beside her armchair, a small table held a dozen unopened sympathy cards. Rachel couldn't bring herself to read them. Acknowledging the condolences felt too much like accepting her daughters were gone forever. She rubbed her tired eyes and set down the case file she'd been reviewing, the one detailing the 4th day of their cruise vacation, when 8-year-old Rayleigh and Millie had vanished without a trace. Her gaze drifted to the sympathy cards. Maybe today she would finally open one. Maybe today she would allow herself to feel what others already assumed, that her girls were never coming home. Rachel's fingers had just touched the envelope when her phone rang. The screen displayed Detective Mace Alvarez. Her heart quickened as she answered. "Detective? Any news?" she asked, her voice betraying the fragile hope she still clung to. She expected the usual, a tip that led nowhere, a sighting that couldn't be verified, or just a courtesy check-in. "Rachel." Alvarez's voice was different today, tight, controlled, with an undercurrent she hadn't heard before. "I've just received information from the police department in Ocracoke Island, North Carolina." She straightened in her chair. "What kind of information?" There was a pause on the other end. "I need to warn you that what I'm about to tell you is disturbing. A local fisherman found a suitcase containing remains we believe might belong to one of your daughters." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Rachel's hand gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. "What?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "I can't explain everything over the phone," Alvarez continued. "We're flying to North Carolina together. The suitcase also contains personal items and objects that we need you to identify immediately." "When?" Rachel asked, already on her feet, moving toward her bedroom on unsteady legs. "I'll pick you up in an hour. The evidence is being held at a forensic lab attached to the sheriff's department in North Carolina. It contains remains, so they're waiting for our arrival before proceeding further." After hanging up, Rachel noticed tears had slipped down her cheeks. She moved mechanically through her home, still in disbelief, as she packed a small overnight bag. Her mind spun with memories from 10 months ago, the cruise she had worked overtime to afford, a vacation meant to create lasting moments with her daughters. She recalled the restaurant where they'd stopped for a late lunch after swimming. It had been quiet just past 3:30 p.m. with minimal staff. She'd left the girls for 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, to answer an important call outside where the reception was better. When she returned, they were gone. The restaurant staff had seen the twins leave but couldn't say where they had gone. The hours that followed were a blur of panic and disbelief as Rachel frantically scoured every corner of the massive ship. The cruise staff issued a ship-wide alert and launched an exhaustive search, combing through public areas, kids' clubs, pools, and restrooms. They conducted cabin-to-cabin checks of all staterooms, including those that were locked or unassigned. Security footage showed the girls watching a poolside performance, but when the crowd dispersed, they disappeared from view. Despite reviewing hours of CCTV footage from around the ship, there was no further trace of them. After 24 hours with no sign of the twins, the ship's flag state was notified. The U.S. Coast Guard and FBI became involved. Local port authorities and police at the ship's last dock and upcoming ports were informed of the situation. A formal investigation commenced, including head counts, lockdowns, and interviews with all passengers who had to show identification. Despite the exhaustive search, Rayleigh and Millie remained missing. Some passengers whispered that they must have fallen overboard. Others speculated they had been taken when the ship docked. The cruise line insisted their security protocols were sound, but the fact remained that 2 8-year-old girls had vanished without explanation. An hour slipped by unnoticed, lost in the haze of Rachel's thoughts. A sudden knock at the door jolted her back to the present. She grabbed her overnight bag and opened the door to find Detective Alvarez standing there, his expression grave yet composed. "Are you ready?" he asked gently. Rachel nodded, locking her door behind her. As they walked to his unmarked police car, she steeled herself for what was to come. After 10 months of uncertainty, she was about to face a mother's worst nightmare, or perhaps find the first real clue to what happened to her daughters. The flight to North Carolina passed in tense silence. Rachel stared out the small airplane window, watching the landscape below change from urban sprawl to the coastal plains of the Outer Banks. Detective Alvarez respected her space, reviewing case notes on his tablet while occasionally glancing her way to ensure she was holding up. When they landed, a local officer met them at the regional airport and drove them to a modest sheriff's substation near the edge of town. The building was utilitarian, a single-story brick structure set back from the road, surrounded by pine trees that swayed in the coastal breeze. "The forensic materials from Ocracoke Island were sent here," Alvarez explained as they approached the entrance. "It's the nearest facility equipped to handle this kind of evidence." Inside, the air was cold and antiseptic, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A sheriff's deputy guided them through a series of corridors to a back room where the evidence was being kept. "Before we go in," Alvarez said, stopping Rachel with a gentle hand on her arm, "I want you to prepare yourself. What you're about to see will be difficult." Rachel nodded, her throat too tight for words. They were given masks and sterile gowns to wear. As they entered the examination room, Rachel noticed a weathered man in his 50s standing to one side, speaking quietly with an officer. His hands were rough and calloused, his skin tanned from years under the sun. "Mrs. Marin," the sheriff said, "this is Curtis Bannister, the fisherman who found the suitcase." The man stepped forward, his expression a mix of sympathy and discomfort. "I'm sorry about your loss, ma'am," he said, his voice gravelly. "I wish I'd found something different that day." Rachel managed a nod of acknowledgment before her attention was drawn to the center of the room. There, on a large stainless steel table, lay the suitcase. It was medium-sized, square, and had clearly been subjected to the harsh elements of the ocean. The once blue material was faded to a grayish hue, its seams warped and bulging from long exposure to salt and sun. A medical examiner stood nearby, waiting for their acknowledgment before he proceeded. "Mrs. Marin, we've documented everything as it was found," he explained. "I'll show you the contents now." Rachel braced herself, gripping the edge of a nearby counter as the examiner carefully lifted the lid of the suitcase. She gasped, tears immediately beating in her eyes. Inside lay the badly decomposed remains of a small child. 10 months drifting in ocean currents had left the body bloated, discolored, and partially skeletonized, but the child had been wrapped in layers of clothing that preserved some identifying features. "The victim appears to have died from asphyxiation," the medical examiner explained clinically. "There's no evidence of blunt force trauma, no sharp injuries, no blood. This indicates the victim likely died quickly and quietly." But Rachel barely heard him. Her eyes were fixed on the faded red Minnie Mouse t-shirt, the same one Millie had been wearing that day on the cruise. Partially visible beneath the decomposed remains was a pair of blue swim goggles, the initial M still faintly visible on the side. "That's Millie's shirt," Rachel whispered, her voice breaking. "Those are her goggles. I bought matching sets for both girls, but Millie's had an M and Rayleigh's had an R." The medical examiner nodded solemnly. "We'd like your permission to take a DNA sample from you for confirmation, though based on your identification of these personal effects." Yes, of course, Rachel agreed numbly. But I don't need DNA to tell me that's my daughter. Detective Alvarez placed a supportive hand on her shoulder as the examiner continued, showing her a separate evidence bag. There was something else found with the remains, he said, an item that doesn't appear to belong with a child's possessions. Inside the clear plastic bag was a silver Zippo lighter, tarnished by seawater but still intact. Engraved on its surface were the initials K.E. "This doesn't belong to my daughters," Rachel confirmed, studying the lighter through the plastic. "They were 8 years old. They wouldn't have had something like this." "It's our first potential lead," Alvarez noted, examining the lighter. "An anomaly that could help us identify whoever did this." Rachel turned to the fisherman. "Mr. Bannister, can you tell me exactly how you found this?" The man shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I was walking along the beach near my home, like I do most mornings. Noticed something washed up that didn't look like usual debris. When I got closer, I could smell... well, it wasn't good. I opened it just enough to see what was inside and called the police right away." "Was there anything else?" Rachel asked desperately. "Any sign of my other daughter, Rayleigh?" Bannister shook his head. "Just the suitcase, ma'am." "I'm sorry." Rachel turned back to Detective Alvarez. "Why would someone put Millie in a suitcase and throw it into the ocean? If they wanted to dispose of her?" She struggled with the words. "Why not something that would sink?" "That's a good question," the sheriff interjected. "This style of suitcase is made of a material that actually becomes buoyant when submerged. If the perpetrator didn't weight it down properly, it would eventually float to the surface and drift with the currents." "What happens now?" Rachel asked, looking between the officers. "We process all the evidence," Alvarez explained. "The suitcase itself is an older model with distinct characteristics. Not many people use this type anymore. We'll track down where it was sold and try to identify who purchased it. Same with the Zippo lighter." The sheriff pointed to the partially peeled price sticker on the bottom of the lighter. "There's a store logo still visible here. It's not from any major chain that I recognize, but it might give us a lead." Rachel peered at the sticker, feeling a flicker of recognition. "That pattern seems familiar somehow, but I can't place it." "May I take photos?" she asked, already reaching for her phone. "Of course," the sheriff nodded. "We'll also send you digital copies of all evidence photos and reports." As Rachel took pictures, Alvarez continued discussing the case with the local authorities. "With these findings, we're officially reclassifying this from a missing persons case to a homicide investigation," he stated. "We'll need to coordinate with the cruise line again, review all security footage, and re-interview key personnel who were working that day. We'll also need to map the ship's route against ocean currents to determine where the suitcase might have been dropped." The sheriff nodded. "Our forensic team will complete their analysis of the remains and all items found in the suitcase. We've already begun DNA testing." "Mrs. Marin," Alvarez turned to Rachel, "we'd like you to stay in the area for a few days. We'll need additional statements from you as the investigation progresses." Rachel wiped a tear from her cheek and straightened her shoulders. "I understand. Before I go to wherever I'm staying, I'd like to visit the beach where the suitcase was found." Alvarez exchanged glances with the sheriff. "Are you sure that's wise?" "I need to see it," Rachel insisted, a new determination in her voice. "I need to stand in that spot. I have to be strong enough to face this if I'm ever going to find Rayleigh." After a moment's consideration, Alvarez nodded. "All right, I'll accompany you. I should see the location myself anyway." "I can take you both there," Bannister offered. "My boat's docked nearby, and some of the investigation team is still at the site." Rachel nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I'd appreciate that." The journey to Ocracoke Island took just under an hour by boat. Rachel sat at the bow, her face turned into the salt spray as Curtis Bannister navigated the choppy waters separating the barrier islands from the mainland. Detective Alvarez sat beside her, alternating between making calls to update his department and watching Rachel with concern. "It's just over there," Bannister called over the engine noise, pointing toward a stretch of shoreline ahead. "That's where I found it." As they approached, Rachel could see a small crowd gathered on the beach. Yellow police tape cordoned off a section of sand, and several officers in uniform moved about the area methodically, taking photographs and measurements. A news van was parked on a nearby access road, a reporter and cameraman standing at a respectful distance from the police line. Bannister skillfully guided the boat toward a small dock extending from the shore. Once secured, he helped Rachel and Detective Alvarez disembark onto the weathered wooden planks. "This way," he said, leading them down the dock and onto the beach. The sand was cool beneath Rachel's feet as they approached the cordoned-off area. An officer lifted the tape to allow them access, nodding in recognition to Detective Alvarez. "Mrs. Marin," the officer said solemnly, "we're very sorry for your loss." Rachel acknowledged him with a slight nod, her eyes fixed on the depression in the sand where the suitcase had been found. Though the actual suitcase had been removed, the investigators had preserved the site for further evidence collection. "Right here," Bannister said, stopping at the edge of the depression. "This is exactly where I found it. The tide was going out, and it had just been left on the sand." Rachel stared at the spot, trying to process that this remote, beautiful stretch of beach was where her daughter's remains had come to rest after 10 months adrift. She crouched down, her fingers digging into the cool, damp sand. "There must be more evidence," she whispered, sifting the grains through her fingers. "Something else that could tell us where Rayleigh is." Detective Alvarez knelt beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "The forensic team has been very thorough, Rachel. This is a significant lead after 10 months of searching. We'll find Rayleigh, too." A few feet away, the news reporter had noticed their arrival and was speaking urgently to her cameraman. Alvarez saw them and frowned. "Let me handle the press," he said, rising to his feet. "You take a moment here." As Alvarez walked over to speak with the reporter, Bannister remained with Rachel. "There's an accommodation not far from here," he said after a moment of respectful silence. "A small cabin resort where you could stay tonight before heading back to the mainland tomorrow. The owner's right over there, actually." He nodded toward a middle-aged man standing with the other onlookers beyond the police tape. Rachel wiped her eyes and stood up. "I think I'd like that. I don't want to leave just yet." "I understand," Bannister said kindly. "When my son went missing in a boating accident 5 years ago, I couldn't leave the harbor for weeks. Sometimes you need to be close to the last place they were." Rachel looked at him with sudden understanding. "Did you ever find him?" Bannister shook his head. "The sea keeps its secrets, but at least I know where to go when I want to talk to him." When Alvarez returned, Rachel told him of her plan to stay overnight. He nodded thoughtfully. "That's fine, but I'm going to assign an officer to stay with you for protection. Until we know more about what happened to your daughters, we need to be cautious." He called over a female officer who had been helping with the scene investigation. "Officer Martinez will accompany you to the cabins and remain with you overnight." Rachel thanked him, then allowed Bannister to introduce her to the cabin owner, a genial man named Greg Harrison, who expressed his deep sympathies and assured her they had plenty of space. "It's not tourist season yet," Harrison explained, as they walked the short distance to the cluster of beachfront cabins. "You'll have all the privacy you need." The cabin was simple but clean, a single room with a queen bed, small kitchenette, and bathroom. A covered porch faced the ocean, with 2 Adirondack chairs positioned to watch the waves. After settling her things inside, Rachel found herself drawn to the porch. Officer Martinez took up a discreet position nearby, giving her space while maintaining her protective watch. A young waitress brought Rachel a mug of coffee, offering it with a sympathetic smile. "Welcome drink on the house. I'm so sorry about your daughter." Rachel accepted the mug with murmured thanks, wrapping her cold fingers around its warmth as she sat watching the waves crash against the shore. The same ocean that had carried Millie's body to this beach continued its eternal rhythm, indifferent to human tragedy. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Rachel noticed movement from the cabin directly across from hers. A man emerged, checking his pockets as if ensuring he had everything before departure. He set his bag down on the small table outside his door while he locked up, then headed toward the resort's main office. Rachel noticed he had left something on the outdoor coffee table, a small metallic object catching the late afternoon sun. Curious, she walked over to check and found a cigarette package and a lighter. She picked them up, turning the lighter over in her hand. On the bottom was a price sticker with a store logo that matched the partial sticker from the evidence lighter. Rachel felt a chill run through her despite the warm air. Seeing the man still heading toward the front desk, she hurried to catch up with him, lighter in hand. "Excuse me," she called. "You forgot this." The man turned, surprised, then smiled when he saw the lighter and his cigarette package. "Thanks. I would have missed that for sure." As he took it from her, Rachel pointed to the sticker. "If you don't mind me asking, where did you get this? I collect vintage lighters, and I've been looking for this brand." "Oh, it's from a little magazine kiosk in Greenville," he replied. "Small place, but they've got all sorts of odds and ends." "Does it have a name?" Rachel asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Kearns's Corner News, I think. It's run by this older guy who's always got some deal going on." "Why? You from around there?" "No, but there's a similar shop in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I live," Rachel said, her heart beginning to race. "It might be the same chain." Before the man could respond, a staff member approached them, carrying a square suitcase identical to the one found on the beach. "Sir, are you sure you want to leave this behind?" the staff member asked. "We found it in your cabin." Rachel's eyes widened as she stared at the suitcase. It was the same color, same style, same size as the one that had contained Millie's remains. "Where did you get that?" The question burst from her before she could stop herself. The man chuckled. "Same place as the lighter, actually. The kiosk owner in Greenville sold it to me for next to nothing when I bought the lighter. Used it once, and the handle's already broken. Total junk. Shouldn't have wasted my money." "Would you?" Rachel swallowed hard. "Would you mind if I had it? I know it sounds strange, but—" "Take it," the man said with a dismissive wave. "Save me the trouble of disposing of it." "Thank you," Rachel said. "May I ask your name and contact information?" "I'd like to thank you properly." The man looked slightly confused, but provided his details. "Name's Jeff Thornton. Can I ask why you're so interested in my old junk?" Rachel took a deep breath. "I'm here with the police investigating my missing daughters. One of them was found in a suitcase, just like this." Thornton's expression shifted from confusion to horror. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." He shook his head. "I hope they find whoever did that. If there's anything else I can do to help—" "Thank you for the information about the kiosk," Rachel said. "It might be more helpful than you know." As Thornton left to catch his ferry back to the mainland, Rachel returned to her cabin with the broken suitcase, her mind racing with possibilities. Officer Martinez watched her curiously, but didn't ask questions. Rachel set the suitcase down and reached for her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed Detective Alvarez's number. "I haven't left yet," Detective Alvarez confirmed when Rachel called. "What's going on?" Rachel quickly explained about the tourist's lighter and suitcase and the connection to a newspaper kiosk in Greenville. "I need to show you this immediately." "Stay where you are," Alvarez instructed. "I'll come to you." 15 minutes later, Rachel stood at the shoreline with Officer Martinez, waiting as Alvarez approached the seaside cabin resort. The detective was deep in conversation with Curtis Bannister, who had apparently joined him after their earlier departure. As they arrived, Rachel noticed from the distance the news van pulling away, the reporter apparently finished with their coverage for the day. "Show me what you found," Alvarez said without preamble. Rachel led him back to her cabin and showed him the suitcase and described the lighter with its price sticker. The man said he bought both items from a magazine kiosk in Greenville called Kern's Corner News. Alvarez's expression sharpened. "Kern's? That's interesting." He grabbed his radio and contacted the station. "I need all available information on a business called Kern's Corner News in Greenville. Owner's name, address, business history, the works." While they waited for the information, Rachel explained how the tourist, Jeff Thornton, had described the owner as an older guy who's always got some deal going on. "If the suitcase matches the one Millie was found in," Rachel said, "and the lighter has the same store sticker as the one with her initials K.E., this can't be a coincidence." Alvarez agreed, examining the suitcase closely. This could be the break we needed. The radio crackled to life. "Detective Alvarez, we've got that information for you. Kern's Corner News is owned by Douglas Kearns, age 57. The business has 3 locations, the main one in Greenville, one in Charlotte, and a new location opening in Virginia Beach next month. Sending you the Greenville address and Kearns' home address now." Alvarez checked his phone as the information came through. "It's late afternoon, but we still have some daylight left. Let's go check out this kiosk." They boarded the police boat with Officer Martinez and Bannister, who offered to navigate them back to the mainland. The return journey seemed faster, urgency driving them forward as the sun continued its westward descent. Once on the mainland, Alvarez requisitioned a police vehicle, and they drove directly to the address provided for Kern's Corner News. The kiosk was a small, standalone structure in a strip mall parking lot, the kind of place that sold newspapers, magazines, lottery tickets, and a hodgepodge of convenience items. A thin man in his 30s stood behind the counter, arranging a display of cigarettes. He looked up as they entered, his expression neutral. "Can I help you?" he asked. "We're closing soon." Alvarez showed his badge. "Detective Alvarez, Virginia State Police. Are you the owner of this establishment?" The man shook his head. "No, sir. I just work here. Mr. Kearns is the owner." "Is he around?" Alvarez asked. "No, he's rarely here. Moves between the different locations, checking in maybe once a week at each place." "Do you have contact information for him?" The clerk hesitated. "Sure, I guess so." He fumbled beneath the counter and produced a business card with a phone number and address. "Do you sell Zippo lighters here?" Rachel asked, stepping forward. The clerk nodded and gestured to a small display case near the register. "Right here. Got a few different styles." Rachel and Alvarez examined the lighters. They were identical to the one found with Millie, just with different designs and no initials. Alvarez showed the clerk a photo of the evidence lighter on his phone. "Have you seen this specific lighter before? It has the initials K.E. engraved on it." The clerk squinted at the image. "We sell a lot of these, and customers sometimes get them engraved after purchase. But yeah, it looks like ours. Same brand, same model." "What about suitcases?" Rachel asked. "Do you sell those here too?" The clerk looked confused. "No, ma'am. We're a newsstand, not a luggage shop." Rachel exchanged glances with Alvarez. "The tourist said he bought the suitcase here." The clerk shrugged. "Maybe Mr. Kearns sold him one of his personal items? He sometimes brings in odd stuff to sell on the side. I don't ask questions." "Thank you for your help," Alvarez said, taking the business card. "If Mr. Kearns comes in, please don't mention our visit. It's important for our investigation." Back in the car, Rachel suggested they drive by Kearns' home address. "Maybe we can get a look at the place, see if there's anything suspicious." Alvarez nodded. "We can do a drive-by, but I don't have a warrant to search the property yet. We'd need more evidence to get one." They drove through a quiet residential neighborhood of modest single-story homes with well-maintained yards. As they approached the address listed for Douglas Kearns, they slowed down, observing the property from across the street. The house was unremarkable, a pale yellow bungalow with white trim and a neatly mowed lawn. A car sat in the driveway, its license plate partially visible. "Look at that," Rachel said suddenly, pointing to the plate. "The first letters are DK and the last two are KE." Alvarez frowned. "That's interesting, but we can't make assumptions. DK could stand for Douglas Kearns, but KE might be coincidental." They sat watching the house for several minutes, but there was no movement or sign of activity inside. "I think we should head back to the station," Alvarez finally decided. "We need to coordinate with local authorities and develop a proper approach. If Kearns is involved in what happened to your daughters, we need to be strategic." Rachel nodded reluctantly. "I'm exhausted anyway. Could you drop me at the ferry station? I'll go back to the cabin for tonight." "I'd rather not have you take the public ferry," Alvarez said. "Officer Martinez can take you back in the police boat. It's safer and more discreet." They drove to the harbor where Officer Martinez was waiting with the boat. As they approached the dock, Rachel suddenly grabbed Alvarez's arm. "That car!" she exclaimed, pointing to a vehicle waiting in line for the ferry. "It has the same license plate, DK and KE." Alvarez followed her gaze, his expression turning serious as he spotted the car. Through the tinted rear window, they could just make out the shapes of people inside, an adult and what appeared to be a child in the back seat. "That could be anyone," Alvarez cautioned. "Let's not jump to conclusions." But Rachel was already moving toward the ferry line, drawn by an instinct she couldn't explain. "I just want to see who's inside," she called back. "Rachel, wait!" Alvarez hurried after her, but before he could stop her, Rachel had reached the ticketing officer who was checking each vehicle before allowing it onto the ferry. As she approached, she saw the driver's window roll down to present tickets to the officer. In the back seat sat a child with an adult female. The child seemed agitated, squirming against the woman's restraining arm. From this distance, Rachel couldn't clearly see the child's face, but something about the girl's profile and hair color triggered a visceral recognition. "Rayleigh," she whispered, her heart pounding. "That's Rayleigh." "Rachel." Detective Alvarez caught up to her, taking her arm. "You can't just approach random vehicles. We don't have enough evidence." "It's her," Rachel insisted, pulling away from his grip. "I saw her face just for a second. That's my daughter." Alvarez hesitated, then nodded to Officer Martinez. "Stay with Rachel. I'll speak with the ferry officer." He approached the ticket booth, speaking quietly with the officer who had been checking vehicles. The two men glanced toward the car with the DKKE license plate, which was now 3 vehicles away from boarding the ferry. After a brief conversation, Alvarez returned to Rachel. "They're going to do a secondary check on that car, just to be safe." Rachel watched anxiously as the line of cars inched forward. When the target vehicle reached the checkpoint, the ferry officer signaled for it to pull aside for additional verification. Through the tinted window, Rachel saw the driver speaking animatedly on a cell phone. Then, suddenly, the car doors flew open. A man in his 50s emerged from the driver's side, while a woman in her 30s got out from the back, pulling a young girl with her. "That's them!" Rachel cried. "That's Rayleigh!" The trio began weaving between the waiting cars, the man leading the way while the woman dragged the reluctant child behind her. Alvarez immediately radioed for backup, his voice sharp with urgency. Suspects fleeing on foot at Ocracoke Ferry Terminal with possible kidnapping victim. Adult male, adult female, and female child approximately 8 years old. Request immediate assistance and perimeter setup. The harbor officer also radioed for additional security while Alvarez turned to Rachel. "Stay with Officer Martinez. We can't risk you getting hurt if they're dangerous." Before Rachel could protest, Alvarez was sprinting toward the fleeing suspects, drawing his weapon but keeping it lowered. "Police! Stop where you are!" he shouted. The man looked back, saw Alvarez, and redoubled his pace, shouting something to the woman that Rachel couldn't hear. Within minutes, the ferry terminal erupted into controlled chaos. Police cruisers converged on the scene, blocking exits while officers on foot pursued the fleeing suspects. Passengers waiting for the ferry were directed to secure areas, and the loading process was halted. Rachel and Officer Martinez watched from a distance as the dragnet closed around the suspects. The man was tackled by 2 officers as he attempted to scale a security fence. The woman, still gripping the child's wrist, tried to duck between parked cars, but was quickly surrounded by police with weapons drawn. "Let go of the girl," an officer commanded. The woman hesitated, then released her hold. The child immediately broke away, looking around frantically until her eyes landed on Rachel. Even from a distance, there was no mistaking the recognition that flashed across the girl's face. "Mom!" she screamed. "Mom!" Rachel broke free from Officer Martinez and ran toward her daughter, meeting her halfway across the parking lot. She dropped to her knees, gathering Rayleigh into her arms with a sob of relief and disbelief. "Rayleigh! Oh my God, Rayleigh!" she cried, holding her daughter tightly, feeling the girl's thin body trembling against hers. Rayleigh clung to her mother, sobbing incoherently, her words muffled against Rachel's shoulder. Alvarez approached them, his expression a mix of relief and professional concern. "We've got them both in custody," he said quietly. "Rachel, we need to get you and Rayleigh someplace safe while we process the suspects." Rachel nodded, unwilling to release her hold on her daughter. "Who are they?" she managed to ask. "IDs identify them as Douglas Kearns and Kathy Evans," Alvarez replied. "Husband and wife, according to their documentation." Rachel's eyes widened. K.E. Kathy Evans, the initials on the lighter. Alvarez nodded grimly. "We've impounded their vehicle and are obtaining a warrant to search it now. Preliminary inspection shows multiple suitcases in the trunk and some concerning materials in the back seat." Rachel looked down at Rayleigh, really seeing her for the first time since their reunion. The girl was frighteningly thin, her once fair skin unnaturally tanned, as though she had been artificially darkened. Her hair had been cut shorter than Rachel had ever kept it, and her eyes held a wariness that no 8-year-old should possess. "She needs medical attention," Rachel said. "An ambulance is already on the way," Alvarez assured her. Within minutes, paramedics had arrived and were examining Rayleigh, who refused to let go of her mother's hand. The girl flinched at the bright penlight the paramedic used to check her pupils, turning her face away with a whimper. "Please stop taking pictures," she murmured. Rachel exchanged a worried glance with Alvarez, who made a note of the comment. Meanwhile, officers conducting the search of the suspect's car emerged with grim expressions. One approached Alvarez, speaking in a low voice. "We found 2 boxes of illegal magazines in the trunk," the officer reported. "Child-centered material, and syringes with what appears to be a sedative in the back seat. Looks like they were preparing to drug her before boarding the ferry." Alvarez's jaw tightened. "Get CSI on this immediately. Document everything." Rachel overheard enough to understand what they had found. Her grief over Millie transformed into white-hot rage as she watched Kearns and Evans being placed in separate police cruisers. Breaking away from Rayleigh briefly, she strode toward Kearns as officers were securing him in the vehicle. "You monster!" she screamed. "You didn't just smuggle your filthy magazines. You murdered my daughter. You murdered Millie." Kearns looked up, his expression disturbingly calm. "I didn't mean to kill the other one," he said matter-of-factly. "I wanted to keep both of them, but my partner backed out. I couldn't handle 2 children alone without getting caught. I had to make a choice." Rachel lunged toward him, but Alvarez caught her, pulling her back. "Save it for the station, Kearns," he growled at the suspect. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." As the cruisers pulled away, the paramedics approached with news about Rayleigh. "She's been drugged with a mild sedative," one reported. and there are signs of malnutrition and physical abuse. We need to transport her to the hospital immediately for a full examination and treatment." Rachel nodded, returning to her daughter's side. "I'm coming with her," she told Alvarez. "Of course," he agreed. "I'll meet you at the hospital after we process the suspects. This is just the beginning, Rachel. We're going to need statements from both of you when Rayleigh is stable." Rachel climbed into the ambulance beside her daughter, holding the girl's hand as the vehicle pulled away, sirens wailing. Despite the horror of what they had uncovered and the grief of Millie's confirmed death, Rachel felt a surge of fierce gratitude that at least one of her daughters had been found alive. "It's over, Rayleigh," she whispered, stroking her daughter's hair. "You're safe now. They can't hurt you anymore." The harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital corridor made Rachel's eyes ache as she paced outside the emergency room. Officer Martinez remained nearby, keeping a watchful eye on both Rachel and the hospital entrance. A nurse had gently but firmly asked Rachel to wait outside while the medical team conducted their initial examination of Rayleigh. Though it tore at her to be separated from her daughter so soon after finding her, Rachel understood they needed space to document Rayleigh's condition properly. "Mrs. Marin?" The nurse who had been attending Rayleigh appeared in the doorway. "You can come in now." Rachel hurried into the room where Rayleigh lay on a hospital bed, looking even smaller and more fragile against the white sheets. An IV drip fed clear liquid into her arm, and a doctor was making notes on a chart nearby. "Mom," Rayleigh whispered, reaching out with her free hand. Rachel took it gently, careful not to disturb the IV. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." The doctor, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a serious expression, approached them. "Mrs. Marin, I'm Dr. Patel. I've completed my initial examination of Rayleigh." "How is she?" Rachel asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Dr. Patel's expression was grave. "Rayleigh is suffering from malnutrition. She's significantly underweight for her age. There are multiple bruises on her back and legs consistent with physical discipline, likely from a narrow, flexible object like a rattan stick or thin belt." Rachel winced, squeezing Rayleigh's hand gently. "There are also marks on her wrists and ankles," Dr. Patel continued, suggesting she was restrained for extended periods, possibly with chains or zip ties. The doctor lowered her voice, though Rayleigh seemed half asleep from the medications they'd given her. "She appears extremely sensitive to bright lights and camera flashes, which is consistent with being subjected to frequent photography. Based on her reactions during our examination and some comments she made, I'm concerned she may have been used as a model for inappropriate material." Rachel closed her eyes briefly, fighting back tears. "What's the treatment plan?" "We'll start with addressing the malnutrition through carefully monitored nutrition. The sedatives in her system should metabolize within 24 hours. Physically, she should recover relatively quickly with proper care. The psychological trauma, however—" Dr. Patel's voice trailed off. "She'll need specialized therapy, Mrs. Marin. This kind of experience leaves deep scars." Rachel nodded, determination settling in her expression. "She'll get everything she needs, whatever it takes." Dr. Patel squeezed her shoulder comfortingly. "She's a strong girl to have survived this, and having you here will make all the difference in her recovery." After the doctor left, Rachel pulled a chair close to Rayleigh's bed and sat down, maintaining her gentle hold on her daughter's hand. Rayleigh drifted in and out of sleep, occasionally muttering words that Rachel couldn't quite catch. Hours passed this way, with nurses coming and going, checking Rayleigh's vitals and adjusting her IV. Outside the window, night had fallen completely when Detective Alvarez appeared in the doorway. "How is she?" he asked quietly, noting Rayleigh's sleeping form. Rachel gestured for him to join her in the corridor. "Physically, she'll recover," she said once they were outside. "Emotionally, it's going to be a long road." Alvarez nodded grimly. "I have updates from the interrogation. Kearns isn't talking much, but Evans is cooperating. She's looking to cut a deal." "What has she told you?" Rachel asked. "A lot," Alvarez said, rubbing his tired eyes. Kearns and Evans weren't acting alone. They were part of a larger operation that produces and distributes illegal magazines featuring children. Kearns would provide the children, and others would handle the production. Rachel felt sick. How many children are we talking about? Based on Evans's statement, we believe there are at least 10 others currently being held at a property Kearns owns under a different name. We've got teams moving on that location now. And what about my daughters? How did he get to them on the cruise? Alvarez sighed heavily. According to Evans, Kearns boarded the cruise under a fake name using a prepaid card and burner email. He disguised himself as part of the ship's maintenance crew by stealing a uniform from a storage closet early in the trip. He also used a small electronic device to temporarily disable the security camera near where he took the girls. Rachel leaned against the wall, trying to process this information. But how did he get them to go with him? My girls knew better than to go with strangers. Evans said he'd been watching them earlier in the cruise. He saw them enjoying one of the magic shows and used that to his advantage. When he encountered them alone, he performed a simple card trick he'd learned from watching the ship's magician. Once he gained their trust, he led them to a crew hallway where there were fewer cameras. Rachel closed her eyes, imagining her trusting daughters following a kind man who showed them magic tricks. And Millie? What happened to her? Alvarez's expression darkened. Evans wasn't there for that part, but from what Kearns told her later, he had originally planned to take both girls. But his partner at the time, not Evans, backed out when he realized there were twins. Apparently, keeping 2 children would have been too risky and complicated. So Kearns... Alvarez paused. He suffocated Millie. No struggle, no blood, no noise. He wrapped her in her clothes, placed her in the suitcase, and disposed of it overboard that night from an unsecured deck area where waste is sometimes jettisoned. Rachel pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting back a sob. And Rayleigh? How did he get her off the ship? He kept her hidden in his cabin bathroom until they docked in Key West the next morning. He drugged her just enough to keep her compliant but responsive, and threatened her about Millie. When they disembarked, he used disguises, sunglasses, fake beard, different clothes, and exited during the early morning rush when most attention was on families with children. Alvarez continued. According to Evans, Kearns had prepared fake documentation for Rayleigh. They've been moving her between different locations, from Key West up through Florida, and finally to North Carolina, to avoid detection. Rachel shook her head in disbelief. They were in Virginia before the cruise. Was he stalking us before this happened? Evans confirmed that Kearns traveled often and had mentioned seeing beautiful twin girls in Virginia that would be perfect for their next edition. We believe he may have spotted you and your daughters before the cruise and planned this specifically. Rachel felt a chill run through her. What about the lighter with KE on it? Was that intentional? Just a coincidence, apparently. Evans said it was her personal lighter that got mixed up with Millie's things when Kearns was rushing to dispose of the body. She'd been looking for it for months. Rachel glanced back at the hospital room where Rayleigh slept. We have to make sure they never get out. And all those magazines, they need to be destroyed. Those children don't deserve to have their trauma circulating forever. Alvarez nodded firmly. We're working with federal authorities now. This is bigger than just one case, but I promise you, Kearns and Evans will pay for what they did to your family. He placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. You should get some rest. Rayleigh will need you at full strength when she wakes up. Rachel nodded, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Thank you, Detective, for everything. As Alvarez left, Rachel returned to Rayleigh's bedside, settling into the uncomfortable hospital chair for what would likely be a long night. Despite the horror of what she had learned, she felt a sense of grim satisfaction that the perpetrators had been caught and a flicker of hope that her surviving daughter was finally safe. Early morning sunlight filtered through the thin hospital curtains as Rachel blinked awake, her neck stiff from sleeping in the chair beside Rayleigh's bed. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She sat up quickly, checking on Rayleigh. Her daughter was still asleep, looking slightly less pale than the night before. The IV drip had been replaced overnight, and a tray with bland hospital breakfast sat untouched on the side table. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. A nurse entered, followed by Dr. Patel. "Good morning, Doctor," Patel said quietly. "How did she sleep?" "Restlessly," Rachel replied. She had nightmares, kept talking in her sleep. Dr. Patel nodded as she examined Rayleigh's chart. "That's to be expected. The sedatives they were giving her are working their way out of her system. We'd like to run some additional tests today, with your permission." "Of course," Rachel agreed. "Whatever she needs." As the doctor continued her examination, Officer Martinez appeared in the doorway, looking like she too had spent an uncomfortable night in a chair. "Mrs. Marin," she said, "Detective Alvarez called. He's on his way here with an update." Rachel nodded gratefully. "Thank you for staying all night." Martinez offered a tired smile. "Just doing my job, ma'am, though I have to admit, I've never seen a case like this in all my years on the force. You're one lucky woman to have found your daughter alive after all this time." Rachel looked down at Rayleigh's sleeping form. "If I were lucky, I wouldn't have lost either of my daughters to begin with." Martinez's expression softened. "I'm sorry, that was insensitive of me." "No," Rachel sighed. "You're right in a way. Many parents never get closure, never find their missing children. At least I have Rayleigh back, and I know what happened to Millie." Her voice broke slightly. "It's a bitter kind of luck, but it's something." Dr. Patel finished her examination and turned to Rachel. "Rayleigh's vital signs are improving. The lab tests show the sedatives are clearing from her system, but she's still severely malnourished. We'll start her on a carefully monitored diet today." "When can I take her home?" Rachel asked. "Not for at least a few days, Doctor," Patel replied. "We need to stabilize her physically and begin a psychological assessment before discharge, and even then she'll need ongoing care." Rachel nodded, accepting the long road ahead. About an hour later, Rayleigh began to stir. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding them briefly before focusing on Rachel. "Mom?" she whispered, as if afraid believing it might make the vision disappear. "I'm here, sweetheart," Rachel said, moving to sit on the edge of the bed. "You're safe now." Rayleigh's eyes filled with tears. "Millie? Where's Millie?" Rachel swallowed hard, unsure how to explain to an 8-year-old that her twin sister had been murdered. Before she could form a response, Detective Alvarez appeared in the doorway, his expression solemn but satisfied. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. Rachel nodded, grateful for the momentary reprieve from answering Rayleigh's question. Alvarez entered, taking off his hat respectfully. "Morning, Rachel. Hello, Rayleigh. I'm Detective Alvarez. I've been helping your mom look for you." Rayleigh regarded him warily, instinctively shrinking against her mother. "It's okay," Rachel assured her. "Detective Alvarez is one of the good guys." Alvarez kept a respectful distance, his voice calm and gentle. "I thought you'd want to know. We conducted a raid early this morning on another property owned by Douglas Kearns. It was on Cedar Island, the place he planned to take Rayleigh yesterday, according to what we gathered from the ferry station. We rescued 3 more children who were being held there." Rachel gasped. "Are they all right?" "They're receiving medical attention now," Alvarez said. "Some have been missing for over a year. We're working on identifying them all and contacting their families." Rachel felt a surge of fierce satisfaction. "What about Kearns and Evans? Are they talking?" "Evans has given a full confession in exchange for leniency at sentencing," Alvarez confirmed. "She said she couldn't live with the guilt any longer. She always knew it was wrong, even though she helped coordinate things from here for her husband. Kearns is still being uncooperative, but with Evans's testimony and the evidence we've gathered, he's now facing multiple life sentences. Good, Rachel said firmly. I hope they rot behind prison for a long time, even for the wife. She still helped keep my daughter captive for months. She still participated in... She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. She'll face substantial charges, Alvarez assured her. Her cooperation may reduce her sentence, but she won't walk free. Rachel glanced back at Rayleigh through the doorway. What happens now? We'll need a formal statement from you, and eventually, when she's ready, from Rayleigh as well. But there's no rush on that. Her recovery comes first. Rachel nodded gratefully. Thank you, Detective. For everything? I'm just glad we found her, Alvarez said sincerely. In all my years on the job, cases like this rarely end with the child coming home alive. After Alvarez left, Rachel returned to Rayleigh's bedside. The girl was awake again, watching her mother with an intensity that spoke volumes about her fear of being separated again. "Mom," she said in a small voice, "Millie's gone, isn't she? Really gone?" Rachel took a deep breath and sat down, taking Rayleigh's hand in hers. "Yes, sweetheart. Millie is gone. The bad man hurt her very badly." Tears welled in Rayleigh's eyes. "I knew it. He told me she was gone, but I didn't want to believe him. I kept thinking she might be somewhere else, like me. That maybe you'd find both of us." "I wish we had," Rachel said, her own tears falling freely now. "I looked for both of you every single day. I never stopped." "I was so scared," Rayleigh whispered. "After they took us and Millie was gone, they kept moving me to different places. They changed how I looked. They made me stand still while they took pictures, and if I cried, they would hit me. They said if I tried to run away or tell anyone, they would hurt you too." Rachel gathered her daughter carefully in her arms, mindful of the IV. "You were so brave, Rayleigh. So brave. And you don't have to be scared anymore. Those people are going to jail for a very long time. They can never hurt you or anyone else again." For a long time, mother and daughter simply held each other, sharing their grief for Millie and their relief at being reunited. Eventually, Rayleigh's medication began to make her drowsy again, and she drifted off to sleep in Rachel's arms. As Rachel gently laid her daughter back against the pillows, she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a small scar near Rayleigh's hairline, likely from one of the many abuses she had suffered over the past 10 months. It was a visible reminder of all that had been taken from her daughter, her innocence, her sense of security, her twin sister. But looking at Rayleigh's sleeping face, Rachel also saw strength there, the same determined spirit that had helped her survive her ordeal. It would be a long road to recovery, filled with therapy sessions, nightmares, and painful memories. There would be a funeral for Millie, and days when grief would overwhelm them both. Yet, for the first time in 10 months, Rachel felt something like hope stirring within her. They would build a new life, one that honored Millie's memory while allowing Rayleigh to heal and eventually thrive again. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, smoothing Rayleigh's hair back from her forehead. "Somehow, someday, we're going to be okay." Outside the window, the morning sun continued its climb into the sky, casting long shadows that gradually shortened as the day progressed. A silent reminder that even after the darkest night, dawn eventually comes. After a desperate 10-month search, when Rachel finally rescued her daughter Rayleigh from the clutches of a kidnapper, she believed their nightmare had ended. With the abductor behind bars, mother and daughter could begin to cope with the absence of her twin sister and slowly rebuild their shattered lives. But neither Rachel nor the authorities knew the full extent of the criminal network operating in this small North Carolina coastal town, a widespread child exploitation ring far bigger than anyone suspected. Soon, mother and daughter would be thrust back into the same nightmare they desperately tried to escape, with the criminal organization that had already claimed one of Rachel's twins now targeting her surviving daughter once again. Before we dive into part 2 of this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. 2 months had passed since that harrowing day at the ferry terminal when Rachel Marin had miraculously found her daughter Rayleigh after almost a year of desperate searching. 2 months of police interviews, psychological evaluations, and legal proceedings. 2 months of nightmares, therapy sessions, and hushed conversations behind closed doors while her daughter slept fitfully in the next room. The small house they now occupied felt nothing like home. Nestled at the edge of a quiet North Carolina town, the narrow 2-bedroom structure was surrounded by trees that cast long shadows across the yard. Security cameras monitored every approach, their red lights blinking steadily through the night. Federal agents rotated shifts outside, a constant reminder that the danger hadn't fully passed. Inside, the walls were bare, except for the drawings Rayleigh created each day. Dozens of them, taped haphazardly around her bedroom and spilling into the hallway. Not landscapes or people as one might expect from a 9-year-old, but fragments. A fence post standing alone against white paper, a single light bulb hanging from nothing. A green van partially visible behind trees, a shoe abandoned in dirt. Rachel preserved each one, handling them carefully as if they might disintegrate at her touch. She recognized them for what they were, pieces of memory too painful to express in words. Since her rescue, Rayleigh hadn't spoken more than necessary. In the courtroom, during the initial hearings against Douglas Kearns and his wife Kathy Evans, she had remained completely silent. Not when the prosecutor gently asked her name, not when the judge offered a soft nod of encouragement, not even when Rachel sat just feet away, trying not to cry as her daughter stared at the table with blank eyes. The girl who had once vanished into the sea and come back was now lost in an entirely different way. So far, the legal proceedings had continued without her testimony. The prosecution had built their case on physical evidence, photographs recovered from Kearns's digital storage, the magazines found in the trunk of his car, forensic analysis of the suitcase containing Millie's remains, and testimony from other witnesses, including Curtis Bannister, the fisherman who found the suitcase, and the ferry officers who assisted in Rayleigh's rescue. Rachel had testified multiple times, recounting the day her daughters disappeared from the cruise ship, the 10 months of searching, and the discovery of Millie's remains. Each time she spoke, Douglas Kearns sat motionless at the defense table, occasionally smirking, occasionally stone-faced, but never showing remorse. This morning, the quiet of their safe house was interrupted by a knock at the front door. Rachel checked the security monitor beside the entrance before opening it to reveal Detective Mace Alvarez and a woman Rachel recognized as Elena Cruz, the child trauma specialist assigned to Rayleigh's case. "Good morning, Rachel," Alvarez said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much darkness. "May we come in?" Rachel nodded, stepping aside to let them enter. She'd grown accustomed to these visits over the past months, law enforcement and support staff coming and going, bringing updates on the case and checking on Rayleigh's progress. Elena carried a leather portfolio clutched to her chest. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her warm brown eyes scanning the room before settling on Rachel. "How is she today?" she asked softly. "The same," Rachel replied, leading them to the living room where morning sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds. "She's been drawing since dawn." Rayleigh sat by the window, her small frame silhouetted against the light, bent over a sketch pad. She didn't look up when they entered, continuing to draw with determined focus, her dark hair falling forward to hide her face. "Rayleigh, Detective Alvarez and Miss Cruz are here," Rachel said gently. Rayleigh's hand paused briefly over her drawing, but she didn't turn. Elena took a seat nearby, keeping a respectful distance. "That's a beautiful drawing, Rayleigh. May I see what you're working on?" Rachel glanced at Alvarez, who remained standing, his posture tense. "What brings you here today?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Elena set her portfolio on the coffee table and extracted a folder. "The trial begins today," she said. "The federal human trafficking trial. If Rayleigh is ready, this would be her chance to testify." Rachel's stomach tightened. "We haven't discussed it again since the last hearing," she said, glancing at her daughter. "She's still very much affected by everything." Alvarez cleared his throat. "I understand your concerns, Rachel, but this trial is different from the preliminary hearings. High-profile jurors, federal prosecutors. It's the case that will determine not just whether Kearns and his wife are guilty, we all know they are, but what their sentences will be." Rachel nodded, knowing what was at stake. The charges against Douglas Kearns were extensive. First-degree murder for Millie's death, which in North Carolina carried penalties of either death or life imprisonment without parole. Kidnapping of a minor, a Class C felony facing at least 19 years per count. Possession and production of child pornography, carrying 20 years per count. Unlawful confinement, child endangerment, and disposal of a body adding another 10 years. If sentenced consecutively, Kearns faced life without parole plus over 100 years, or potentially the death penalty if the DA pursued it and the jury agreed. "Will her testimony really make a difference?" she asked without looking up. "You seem to have enough evidence." "It would," Alvarez said, leaning against the counter. "But honestly, Rachel, we do have enough to put Kearns away for life either way. The DA believes the death penalty is warranted and the evidence supports it, but juries can be unpredictable. Rayleigh's testimony would remove any doubt." "Maybe it's better if he gets life," Rachel said quietly. "Death would be too quick for him. I want him to suffer, to know what it's like to be confined, to have your freedom taken away, just like my daughters experienced." Alvarez didn't respond immediately, his gaze drifting toward the living room where Elena sat with Rayleigh, speaking in low, gentle tones. "What about the others?" Rachel asked, changing the subject. "The people Douglas worked with on those magazines? Have you identified any of them?" "We're still investigating. Evans has given us some names, locations. It's complicated. These operations are deliberately fragmented to protect those at the top, but we're making progress." Rachel nodded, then fell silent. They saw Elena still speaking softly to Rayleigh, who remained focused on her drawing. The child trauma specialist looked up as they entered. "Rayleigh and I have been talking about what it means to share our stories," Elena explained. "About how sometimes, even when it's hard, telling people what happened to us can help others who might still be scared or in danger." Rachel took a seat near her daughter. "No one expects you to do this, sweetheart. Not if you're not ready." "I've explained that if she doesn't want to speak today, that's completely okay," Elena said. "The evidence is strong, and the other children who were rescued will be testifying as well." Alvarez checked his watch. "The trial starts in a few hours. We should head back soon if—" "I want to go." All three adults turned in surprise at the sound of Rayleigh's voice, so rarely heard these days. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Rachel asked, her heart racing. Rayleigh set down her pencil and looked up, her eyes meeting her mother's for the first time that morning. "I want to speak today." Elena leaned forward slightly. "Rayleigh, that's very brave of you, but I want you to know you don't have to force yourself." "I'm not," Rayleigh said, her voice small but determined. "I think Millie would want me to. I think she'd want people to know what happened." Her fingers traced the outline of the courthouse she'd drawn. "I want to be brave like Millie was." Rachel felt tears burning behind her eyes. She reached out and gently took her daughter's hand. "Are you sure? It will be difficult?" Rayleigh nodded. "I need to do this, Mom, for Millie, and for the other kids who might still be out there." Elena smiled encouragingly. "You're already being very brave, Rayleigh, and I'll be right there with you the entire time. Your mom will be just a few feet away." Detective Alvarez stood, pulling out his phone. "I'll call ahead. Let them know Rayleigh will be testifying today." He stepped into the hallway to make the call. Rachel squeezed her daughter's hand. "Let's get you ready then." As they prepared, Elena explained what would happen in the courtroom, who would be there, what questions might be asked, how Rayleigh could ask for a break if she needed one. Rachel listened while helping Rayleigh choose appropriate clothes, a simple blue dress with a light cardigan, comfortable shoes, her hair neatly brushed and secured with the butterfly clips she'd always favored. When they were ready, Rachel stood in the doorway of Rayleigh's bedroom, watching as her daughter carefully placed her sketchpad and pencils in a small backpack. Despite the circumstances, a surge of pride warmed Rachel's chest. After everything Rayleigh had endured, she was still finding courage. They walked together to the living room where Alvarez and Elena waited. Without a word, they left the safe house and got into Alvarez's unmarked police car. They arrived at the courthouse, a towering structure of limestone and glass that seemed to loom over them as they approached. Elena guided Rayleigh and Rachel through a private entrance, bypassing the media gathered outside. The courtroom was cold, both in temperature and atmosphere. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above as the federal courtroom hushed for the afternoon testimony. The jury sat still, their eyes already wearied by the images and reports from the morning's proceedings. Rachel sat just behind the prosecution's bench, hands trembling softly in her lap, watching her daughter ascend the witness stand for the first time. Rayleigh looked small on the stand. Her hair was brushed neatly, her clothes simple and soft-colored, chosen to bring comfort. She didn't glance at anyone, not her mother, not the jury, only the folded hands resting in her lap. The courtroom held its breath as the prosecutor approached gently, voice calm. Rayleigh's voice broke the silence, wavering but clear. "He told me to stand there and not move. He was trying to put Millie in the suitcase. She didn't fit. He twisted her arms until it cracked. I think it was her shoulder." Rachel clenched the edge of her seat, her breath catching. Several jurors turned away briefly. "He said if I screamed or ran, he'd break mine too." Rayleigh swallowed hard. The microphone picked up every tiny sound. "He made me sit in the corner while he zipped it shut. Then he pushed it under the bed. I had to sleep in the same room with it that night." Rayleigh's eyes remained downcast, her small voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "I couldn't sleep, so he injected me with something. Then the next morning when I woke up, the suitcase was missing and Millie was gone." Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the arms of the chair. The prosecution approached again, this time with a different line of questioning. The screen beside the jury lit up with blurred evidence from the recovered digital files, carefully edited to preserve dignity, but still chilling. "Do you recognize any of these items or places, Rayleigh?" the prosecutor asked gently. She nodded. "That's the yellow blanket from the camper, and that's the house, Cedar Island. We were going there with the ferry that day when Mom found me." A collective hush followed. The judge leaned slightly forward. "They took pictures there," Rayleigh continued, "in a back room with black curtains, and sometimes outside, where no one could see. They gave us things to drink. I think it made us sleepy. Or slow. The ones who did what they were told got food. I remember they gave me a grilled cheese sandwich when I smiled right." Rayleigh's eyes stayed down. She spoke like reading from a page that had long been carved into her memory. "Sometimes we got 3 days of food if we didn't cry." A murmur moved through the courtroom. A juror wiped her cheek. The defense lawyer sat frozen, not daring to object. As the judge called a break, people began to file out. The doors opened. Rachel rose slowly, steadying herself, her chest tight from what she'd just heard. She reached for her coat when she noticed a man sitting alone near the back row, his face unreadable. He wasn't familiar, but he was staring, not at Rachel, but at Rayleigh. Unmoving, cold. His eyes never blinked. Then, without a word, he stood and walked quickly toward the exit doors. Rachel's instincts flared. She moved fast, weaving through the scattering crowd, trying to keep her eyes on the back of his jacket. Her heart pounded, not out of fear but urgency. She reached the doors just as they swung shut, and then Rayleigh's cry pierced the hallway. Rachel turned. Rayleigh was in the arms of Elena Cruz, shaking and sobbing uncontrollably. Her eyes locked on her mother, reaching for her, not with words, but terror. Rachel froze. One more step, and she could have followed the man. But she didn't. She turned back. The man was gone. She returned to her daughter. "Please don't go, Mom," Rayleigh sobbed, clutching at Rachel's blouse. "Don't leave me." Rachel apologized profusely, holding Rayleigh close. When her daughter finally calmed down, she asked if she knew who that man was. Rayleigh shook her head, then said, "I want to go home," wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Elena Cruz, who had been standing nearby, stepped forward. "Of course, Rayleigh, you've been so brave today, and you've helped enormously. I'll let the judge know that you've completed your testimony." Police officers escorted them through a private exit to avoid the press, leading them to a waiting car that would take them back to the safe house. As they drove away from the courthouse, Rachel held Rayleigh close, her thoughts torn between relief that the testimony was over and unease about the man she'd seen watching her daughter. Something about his focused stare had triggered her maternal alarm bells, the same instinct that had told her, months ago at the ferry terminal, that her daughter was in the back seat of Douglas Kern's car. They arrived back at the safe house, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the front yard. As the police escort drove away, Rachel guided Rayleigh inside, locking the door behind them and enabling the security system. "Why don't I make us some hot chocolate?" Rachel suggested, trying to lighten the mood. "You did so well today, honey." Rayleigh sat at the small table, her sketchpad open before her, but for once she wasn't drawing. Instead, she stared out at the trees that surrounded their safe house, her expression pensive. "Mom," she said hesitantly, "do you think we could go somewhere today? Not the courthouse. Just somewhere else." "Like where, sweetheart?" "I saw a camping ground on our way back yesterday. It looked peaceful. Maybe we could have a picnic?" Rachel looked up from the kitchen, surprised. Rayleigh had shown little interest in going anywhere since they'd moved to the safe house. "I don't know, sweetheart," Rachel said hesitantly. "I'm feeling troubled by that man we saw at the courtroom. I'd rather we stay safe here." Rayleigh's shoulders slumped slightly. "Okay." Rachel felt a pang of guilt. She went to the kitchen and began making them a quick lunch of grilled cheese sandwiches, Rayleigh's favorite since childhood, though the food now carried darker associations after her testimony today. As the sandwiches sizzled in the pan, Rachel checked her phone and saw a text message from Elena. "Thank you again for Rayleigh's bravery to testify. Her testimony shed a deeper light for the jury and community on how serious this case is, supporting our target to aim for life imprisonment for Douglas. There will be another trial tomorrow. Your presence would be valuable." Rachel stared at the message, then looked over at Rayleigh, who had retrieved a box of crayons and a coloring book from the living room and was heading to her bedroom. This shouldn't be the kind of life for her daughter, shuttling between a safe house and courtrooms, reliving her trauma over and over. She texted Elena back, "I'll consider it and talk with Rayleigh. Thank you for your support today." After sending the message, she went to Rayleigh's bedroom doorway. Her daughter sat cross-legged on the floor, meticulously coloring a picture of a forest scene. "Hey," Rachel said softly. "What do you think about having lunch at that camping ground like you suggested? You're right. We can't stay cooped up in here forever. Not many people know us here, and maybe it would be good to shake off some of the stress from today." Rayleigh looked up, surprise and excitement briefly lighting up her face. "Really? We can go?" "Really," Rachel confirmed with a smile. "But let's be careful. Wear your hat and that long cardigan and pants. We need to maintain our low profile, and I'll inform Detective Alvarez about it." Rayleigh nodded earnestly, already getting to her feet. Rachel returned to the kitchen, finished preparing their lunch, and packed everything into a small cooler along with some drinks and fruit. She added a blanket and some hand sanitizer, then grabbed her purse and the car keys. She checked her phone one last time and saw a confirmation text from the detective. "Just keep a low profile and make sure your phone is fully charged. I'll have an officer do a drive-by check once an hour." When everything was ready, they walked out of the house and got into the car that the police had lent them. The camping ground wasn't far away. In less than 20 minutes, they arrived at a peaceful clearing surrounded by tall pines with simple wooden picnic tables scattered throughout. Being a weekday afternoon, the place was nearly deserted. Rachel chose a table at the edge of the clearing, far from the few other visitors. She set up their lunches while Rayleigh watched a pair of cardinals flitting between branches overhead. In peaceful quiet, they enjoyed the open air. They had remained indoors for weeks, and with everything going on, their days had felt so gloomy. This short getaway, with the nice cool weather, was a brief relief. "Would you be willing to come to court again tomorrow?" Rachel asked eventually, watching Rayleigh carefully. Rayleigh took a small bite of her sandwich, considering the question. "I think I can do it," she said finally. Then, after a pause, "Mom, when will all this end? Is this my normal life now?" Rachel reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "The worst has passed, and from here on, things will get better. But it takes time. There are still months of court trials like this, but it's important to make sure the bad people can't hurt us again." Rayleigh's eyes grew distant. "Then why am I still feeling unsafe, Mom? You know, Douglas and his wife weren't the only ones. There are still those people who took my pictures." Rachel's face turned serious. She knew about this. Detective Alvarez and the police were still pursuing and investigating because apparently, even though the studio and some of the people and cameramen had been caught by police at Cedar Island, they all knew the police hadn't gotten to the main operation. "They will catch those men in time," Rachel tried to comfort her. "Those people must be hiding now with police on their tails." They finished their lunch in companionable silence, and then Rayleigh said she wanted to grab a cool drink from the cooler in the car. Rachel immediately stood up. "I'm coming with you," she said. Rachel had never let her daughter go out of sight anymore. They walked back to the parking lot where their car sat alone beneath a cluster of pine trees. As they approached, Rachel noticed something tucked beneath the windshield wiper, a slim rectangular object that definitely hadn't been there when they arrived. "Wait here," she told Rayleigh, immediately on guard. Rachel approached the car cautiously, scanning the surrounding area for any sign of movement. The parking lot and nearby camping spaces remained quiet. She reached the car and carefully extracted what appeared to be a magazine rolled into a tight cylinder. As she unrolled it, her heart nearly stopped. The cover featured a photo of Rayleigh, not a recent one, but clearly taken during her captivity. The child in the image was posed provocatively, her face recognizable, despite makeup that made her look older. The magazine title was in a language Rachel didn't recognize, but the meaning was unmistakable. Rachel quickly re-rolled the magazine, fighting the wave of nausea that threatened to overwhelm her. She turned to check on Rayleigh, who stood several yards away, as instructed, a confused expression on her face. "Mom, what's that?" Rayleigh called. "Who put it on your car?" Rachel stuffed the magazine into her bag, her mind racing. "Nothing, sweetheart. Probably just an advertisement." She forced a smile she didn't feel. "Let's get your drink and head back to the house. I think we've had enough fresh air for today." But as she opened the car door to retrieve the cooler, a chill ran down her spine. Someone had found them here, someone who knew who they were, and had access to the exploitation materials featuring Rayleigh. Someone who wanted them to know they were being watched. "Mom?" Rayleigh had moved closer, her expression fearful. "What's wrong?" Before Rachel could answer, the sound of an approaching vehicle caught her attention. A green van pulled into the parking lot, moving slowly along the row of empty spaces before stopping about 50 feet from their car. Rachel froze, memories of Douglas Kearns's vehicle flashing through her mind. She reached for Rayleigh, pulling her daughter close as the van's side door slid open. Two men emerged, both wearing dark clothing, their faces partially obscured by baseball caps. They moved with purpose, heading directly toward Rachel and Rayleigh. "Get in the car," Rachel whispered urgently to her daughter, fumbling for her keys. But before they could reach safety, the men closed the distance. One grabbed Rayleigh's arm, yanking her away from Rachel with such force that the child cried out in pain. "No!" Rachel lunged forward, seizing her daughter's hand and refusing to let go. "Help! Someone help us!" The second man shouted to the driver, "Go! Go! Go!" The van lurched forward even as the men struggled to pull Rayleigh inside. Rachel ran alongside, still clutching her daughter's hand, her feet scrambling for purchase on the gravel. "Bring the mother, too," one man shouted. "The boss can deal with her later." The other hesitated, then yelled to the driver, "No! Reverse and hit her. End her right here." The van suddenly shifted into reverse, its tires screeching on the pavement. Rachel saw what was coming but couldn't let go of Rayleigh. Not again. Never again. The impact sent her flying backward onto the asphalt, her grip on Rayleigh finally broken. Pain exploded through her body as she hit the ground hard. Through blurred vision, she saw one of the men aim something at her. A gun. She rolled to the side just as the shot cracked through the air, the bullet striking the pavement inches from her head. The van's door slammed shut with Rayleigh inside, her terrified face pressed against the window, mouth open in a silent scream as the vehicle accelerated away. Rachel staggered to her feet, blood streaming from cuts on her face where she'd struck the ground. Her ribs screamed in protest, but adrenaline pushed her forward. She lurched toward their car, fumbling with the keys, desperate not to lose sight of the van that was rapidly disappearing down the access road. Inside the car, she started the engine with trembling hands and floored the accelerator, tires spinning on the gravel before finding purchase. She grabbed her phone from the center console and dialed Detective Alvarez's number. "They took her!" she screamed when he answered. "Men in a green van just took Rayleigh." "Where are you?" Alvarez demanded, his voice sharp with urgency. "The camping ground near Lake Morris. I'm following them, headed east on the access road toward the highway." "Rachel, don't engage with them. They're armed and dangerous. Pull over and wait for backup." "There's no way I'm letting them take my daughter again," Rachel shouted, swerving around a curve to keep the van in sight. She shared her live location with Alvarez. "Track me. I'm not losing them." The green van weaved through sparse traffic, clearly trying to shake her pursuit. Rachel stayed with them, ignoring the pain that radiated through her body with every bump and turn. Blood from her forehead dripped into her left eye, partially obscuring her vision, but she refused to slow down. The chase continued for miles, the countryside giving way to more isolated terrain, marshy areas with fewer homes and businesses. The cell signal on her phone weakened, dropping to a single bar as they entered a remote area. Eventually, the van turned onto a narrow dirt road that led toward what appeared to be an old, disused dock. Rachel followed at a distance, her heart pounding as she saw the van stop beside a weathered wooden structure extending into a murky inlet. A second vehicle was already parked there, a black sedan, and a small motorboat was tied to the dock. She watched in horror as the men dragged Rayleigh from the van toward the boat. Her daughter was struggling, her small body twisting against their grip, but they were too strong. Rachel made a split-second decision. She stopped her car 100 yards back, partially hidden by overgrown vegetation, and slipped out quietly. There was no time to wait for Alvarez and his team. If those men got Rayleigh onto that boat, she might never see her daughter again. She crept forward through the tall grass beside the dirt road, staying low, using the sparse tree cover for concealment. When she'd closed half the distance to the dock, one of the men looked in her direction, his hand moving to his waistband where Rachel had seen the gun. She froze, holding her breath, but it was too late. He'd spotted her. "Over there!" he shouted, pointing in her direction. Rachel abandoned stealth and broke into a run, sprinting toward the dock where Rayleigh was being forced into the boat. "Rayleigh!" she screamed. Two men intercepted her before she could reach the water's edge. They tackled her to the ground, knocking the wind from her lungs. As she struggled to breathe, rough hands bound her wrists with plastic zip ties. They dragged her toward the boat where Rayleigh sat, huddled in the stern, her face streaked with tears. When she saw her mother, she reached out with bound hands. "Mom!" The apparent leader of the group, a stocky man with a pockmarked face, cursed under his breath. "Search her, then get rid of her car and phone." They roughly went through Rachel's pockets, confiscating her phone and car keys. One man crushed the phone under his boot before removing the battery and tossing both pieces into the murky water. Another took her car keys and headed back up the path. "If you want to be with your daughter all the way to the grave, so be it," the leader said, shoving Rachel into the boat beside Rayleigh. The engine roared to life, and the boat pulled away from the dock, heading deeper into the maze of waterways that characterize this part of coastal North Carolina. Rachel managed to shift closer to Rayleigh, leaning so their shoulders touched, the only comfort she could offer with her hands bound behind her back. "I'm here," she whispered. "I won't leave you." Rayleigh's tear-filled eyes met hers, terror and a terrible resignation reflected in their depths. "They'll kill us both now," she whispered, "like they killed Millie." Rachel shook her head, ignoring the pain from her injuries. "Number Detective Alvarez knows where we were. He'll find us." But as the boat accelerated away from the mainland, putting more distance between them and any potential rescue, even Rachel struggled to believe her own words. The boat cut through the water for nearly an hour, following a complex route through marshlands and narrow channels before the open sea came into view. Rachel and Rayleigh remained bound and gagged, seated in the stern under the watchful eye of two armed men while a third navigated. They had placed duct tape over Rayleigh's mouth after she'd tried to scream when they passed another boat. Rachel's mouth was similarly sealed, the adhesive pulling painfully at the cuts on her face. The men conversed quietly among themselves, occasionally glancing at their captives with expressions ranging from indifference to open malice. "Boss gonna be mad we brought the mother," one said, a lanky man with a prison tattoo visible on his neck. "What choice did we have?" replied another, the same pockmarked man who had given orders at the dock. "She saw our faces, followed us, nearly got herself shot. Better to let him decide what to do with her." "Maybe he'll use her too," a third suggested with a cruel smile. "Older models don't sell as well, but there's always a market for mother-daughter sets." The others laughed, and Rachel felt bile rise in her throat. These men weren't just kidnappers. They were part of the same trafficking operation that had taken her daughters from the cruise ship almost a year ago. Rayleigh trembled against her, and Rachel wished desperately that she could put her arms around her child, protect her from the horror they were facing. Instead, all she could do was press closer, trying to convey through that small contact that she wasn't alone. Eventually, an island came into view, larger than the small patches of sand and marsh grass they had passed, with actual structures visible near the shoreline. As they approached, Rachel could make out a small dock with several other boats moored beside it. "Home sweet home," the navigator announced, reducing speed as they entered the shallow water near the dock. Rachel tried to memorize every detail of their surroundings, searching for landmarks or anything that might help identify their location if they managed to escape or contact help. The island appeared largely undeveloped except for a cluster of buildings set back from the shore among the trees. Once docked, the men roughly hauled them from the boat. Rachel stumbled on legs numb from sitting in one position too long, and they laughed as she struggled to stay upright. Rayleigh was more steady, apparently accustomed to being transported this way from her previous captivity. "Move," the pockmarked man ordered, shoving Rachel forward. They were marched up a sandy path toward a structure that resembled a warehouse, a plain rectangular building with few windows and metal siding that had been weathered by salt air. As they approached, Rachel heard the unmistakable sound of machinery coming from inside. The main entrance led directly into a large open space filled with industrial printing equipment. Workers in gray coveralls operated the machines, which were churning out glossy magazine pages. With horror, Rachel realized she was looking at the production facility for the very magazines that had featured her daughter. On the nearest conveyor belt, stacks of magazines were being assembled, their covers displaying children in poses that made Rachel's stomach turn. And there, among the latest issues waiting to be bound, was one with Rayleigh's photograph, the same image that had been left on their car at the camping ground. Rayleigh had seen it too. She made a muffled sound behind her gag, her eyes wide with recognition and terror. They were led past the printing floor to a corridor that branched off from the main space. The men took them through a series of turns, finally stopping at a door with a small, darkened window. One of them unlocked it and pushed it open, revealing a sparsely furnished room with 2 chairs in the center. "Sit," the pockmarked man ordered, cutting the zip ties on their wrists, only to immediately secure them to the chairs with rope. Rachel winced as circulation returned to her hands, the sensation like 1,000 needles pricking her skin. One of the men removed the tape from her mouth, taking no care to minimize the pain as it tore away from her cuts. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded as soon as she could speak. "You know the police are looking for us. They'll find this place." The men ignored her, adjusting the ropes to ensure neither she nor Rayleigh could move. "Boss will be here soon," one said to the others. "He'll want to talk to them before we finish the job." They left, the heavy door closing with an ominous click as the lock engaged. Rachel immediately began working at the ropes binding her wrists, twisting and pulling despite the pain. "Rayleigh, are you hurt?" she asked, her eyes scanning her daughter for any visible injuries. Rayleigh shook her head, her mouth still covered with tape. Rachel wished they'd removed it, but perhaps it was better this way. She didn't want Rayleigh to see how frightened she truly was. "We're going to be okay," Rachel said, with far more confidence than she felt. "Detective Alvarez knows we're missing. He'll be looking for us." Rayleigh's eyes held a knowledge beyond her years. She understood their situation all too well from her previous captivity. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as they waited in the silent room. Finally, the door opened, and a man in an expensive suit entered. He was tall and lean, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of tan that spoke of leisure time on yachts, rather than honest work in the sun. His shoes, Italian leather, Rachel guessed, clicked softly on the concrete floor as he approached. Behind him came 2 of the men who had kidnapped them, standing at attention near the door. The suited man studied Rachel for a long moment before turning his attention to Rayleigh. With surprising gentleness, he removed the tape from the child's mouth. "Hello again, Rayleigh," he said, his voice cultured and calm. "I'd hoped we wouldn't meet again under these circumstances." "Who are you?" Rachel demanded. "What do you want with my daughter?" The man turned to her, his expression almost regretful. "My name is Leo Barbos, and to be perfectly honest, Mrs. Marin, I don't have anything personal against either of you. This is simply business." "Business?" Rachel spat the word. "Kidnapping children is business to you?" Barbos sighed, as if explaining something to a particularly dense student. "The business is giving people what they're willing to pay for. Unfortunately, your daughter became part of that business when Douglas Kearns brought her to us nearly a year ago." "You're the one Douglas and his wife worked for," Rachel realized. "You run this operation." "I prefer to think of myself as a publisher," Barbos said with a thin smile. "Douglas was a supplier, not a particularly good one in the end. His carelessness has cost me significantly." He turned to Rayleigh. "You were always such a sweet, quiet child. You should have stayed that way." Rayleigh stared back at him, her expression a mixture of fear and defiance. "My associate was in the courtroom yesterday," Barbos continued. "He reported that you've been talking, not just about Douglas, but about our little enterprise here. That presents a problem for me." "The police already know about you," Rachel said. "They're investigating. It's only a matter of time before they find this place." "Perhaps," Barbos acknowledged, "but your daughter's testimony accelerates that timeline considerably. The authorities have been sniffing around our operation for months, but without specific details, they've had little success. Now, with Rayleigh talking," he spread his hands. "I'm a businessman, Mrs. Marin. I deal in risk management and loss mitigation. Your daughter has become a liability I can no longer afford." The cold, matter-of-fact way he discussed murdering a child sent shivers down Rachel's spine. "You won't get away with this," she said, struggling against her restraints. "Detective Alvarez tracked us to the camping ground. He'll find this island." "By the time he does, if he does, there will be nothing left to find," Barbos replied. "We've weathered investigations before. Assets move, operations relocate, business continues." He checked his watch. "Now, since time is limited, I think we should proceed." He nodded to the men at the door. "Take them to the studio. The girl first. The mother can watch from the viewing room." "What are you going to do?" Rachel asked, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. "Making the best of an unfortunate situation," Barbos said. "Rayleigh's last photo session will be quite special. There's a dedicated audience for darker material, and since we need to dispose of her anyway, we might as well maximize the profit." Rachel lunged against her restraints, the chair rocking but not tipping. "You monster!" "She's a child." Barbos didn't respond to her outburst. He simply turned and left the room as the two men untied Rayleigh from her chair, keeping her wrists bound, and dragged her toward the door. "No!" Rachel screamed. "Rayleigh!" "Mom!" Rayleigh's voice broke as she was pulled away. "Don't leave me!" But the door closed, cutting off Rachel's response, and Rachel was left alone with the terrible knowledge of what these men planned to do to her daughter. Two men returned to the room where Rachel remained bound to the chair. Without speaking, they untied her from the chair, but kept her wrists secured behind her back with zip ties. They marched her out of the room and down a different corridor, moving deeper into the building rather than back toward the printing area. Rachel tried to memorize the route, but the hallways all looked alike. Plain, industrial, with identical unmarked doors at regular intervals. They finally stopped at one such door, which one of the men unlocked before shoving her inside. The room was empty except for a metal folding chair facing a large television screen mounted on the wall. Unlike the room where they'd been held before, this one had something else that immediately caught Rachel's eye, a rope hanging from a hook in the ceiling with a noose already tied at the end. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice breaking slightly. One of the men, the taller of the two, gestured to the chair. "For now, you get to watch. Later, you can use that rope yourself, or we'll use it for you. Either way, that's how this ends for you." Rachel felt bile rise in her throat. "You're going to make me watch whatever you're doing to my daughter, and then expect me to hang myself?" The second man shrugged. "Boss says to give you the option. More humane, he thinks. But it doesn't matter to us how you go." He pointed to the television. "That's live feed from the studio where your kid is. Enjoy the show." They pushed her into the chair, though they didn't tie her to it. The zip ties on her wrists remained, however, limiting her options for escape. Before leaving, one of the men pointed to a small red button beside the door. "That's a panic button. Press it if you want company. Otherwise, nobody'll bother you till the session's over." The door closed with a heavy click as the lock engaged. Rachel immediately tried the handle, but it was securely locked from outside. She turned her attention to the room, searching desperately for anything she could use to free herself or as a weapon. There was nothing. The walls were bare concrete, the floor similarly unadorned. The only furniture was the metal chair and the television, which was bolted to the wall and encased in a protective metal housing to prevent tampering. The rope hung just a few feet away, its very presence a mockery of hope, an invitation to end her own suffering before they did it for her. Rachel sank onto the chair, her mind racing. Was Detective Alvarez tracking them? Had he found the abandoned campsite, her damaged phone, the signs of struggle? How long would it take him to locate this island, hidden among countless others in the coastal waterways? The television screen suddenly flickered to life, drawing her attention with horrific inevitability. The camera showed a room she hadn't seen before, a dimly lit space with concrete walls much like the one she occupied, but decorated in a macabre parody of a prison cell, complete with metal chains hanging from the walls. Rachel's heart stopped as she saw two men dragging Rayleigh into the frame. Her daughter's face was pale with terror, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for escape. A third person entered the view, the man Barbos had called Boss, now wearing latex gloves. He approached Rayleigh with clinical detachment, producing a syringe from his pocket. "No," Rachel whispered, pressing closer to the screen. "No, please, no." She watched in helpless horror as Barbos injected something into Rayleigh's arm. Her daughter's struggle weakened almost immediately, though she remained conscious, her movements becoming sluggish and uncoordinated. "That's it," Barbos said on the screen, his voice tinny through the television speakers. "Just enough to keep you compliant but aware. We want authentic reactions for the camera." One of the men set up professional photography equipment, while another began changing Rayleigh's clothing, dressing her in outfits that made Rachel physically ill to see. Barbos directed the process with the air of someone who had done this many times before, suggesting poses and camera angles with practiced ease. Rachel couldn't bear to watch, yet couldn't tear her eyes away. This was happening to her daughter, right now, in this building. The thought that she was only rooms away, yet unable to help, was unbearable. She forced herself to look away from the screen, instead focusing on the rope hanging in the corner. In that moment, she understood why someone might choose to end their own life rather than endure this kind of helplessness and grief. "If they kill Rayleigh," she whispered to herself, "I'll use that rope. There would be nothing left to live for." Hours passed, marked only by the changing scenes on the television as Barbos and his photographers moved Rayleigh to different parts of the room, different poses, different costumes. The drug they'd given her kept her compliant but conscious, a horrific middle ground that Rachel knew was deliberate, designed to capture fear and suffering in the images they were creating. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her, and she dozed fitfully in the chair, jerking awake each time Rayleigh's voice filtered through the speakers. During one such moment of wakefulness, she noticed something she hadn't before, a small ventilation grate near the floor, partially hidden by the chair. Rachel quickly moved to examine it. The grate was secured with screws, but they appeared old and possibly loose. Without tools, however, she had no way to remove them. She tried using her fingernails, but the screws were too tight, the metal edges cutting into her skin as she tried to turn them. Frustrated, she returned to the chair, her gaze drawn unwillingly back to the television where the nightmare continued. On screen, Barbos appeared to be winding down the session, instructing his men to prepare for the final phase. Rachel knew instinctively what that meant. They were nearly done with the photographs and would soon move on to killing her daughter. Her heart raced with renewed panic. She had to do something, anything, to buy more time. She looked around the room again, this time noticing the light fixture overhead. It was a simple fluorescent panel, recessed into the ceiling, but not flush with it. If she could somehow reach it, perhaps there was wiring she could access. Rachel dragged the chair beneath the light and carefully climbed onto it, balancing precariously with her hands still bound behind her back. Standing on tiptoes, she could just reach the edge of the panel with her fingertips. It moved slightly under her touch. Encouraged, she pushed harder, and one corner of the panel shifted upward, revealing a small gap. But without the use of her hands, she couldn't exploit this potential escape route. She stepped down from the chair, frustration and despair threatening to overwhelm her. Her gaze drifted to the window in the door, small and darkened with a one-way film, but perhaps visible from the outside if someone passed by. Rachel moved to the window, pressing her face against it, searching for any sign of movement in the corridor. It was empty, the silence broken only by the awful sounds from the television. There had to be a way out. There had to be something she could use, some way to free herself and reach Rayleigh before it was too late. She thought of the panic button by the door. Pressing it would bring the guards back, but what then? She had no weapon, no advantage, no plan. As darkness fell outside, casting the room into deeper shadow, Rachel leaned against the wall, sliding down until she sat on the floor. Tears streamed down her face as the horrible reality of their situation pressed in on her. "I'm sorry, Rayleigh," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you." A sound at the door snapped her back to alertness. The lock clicked, and the door began to open slowly, carefully. Rachel tensed, preparing for the return of her captors. But the man who slipped inside was not one of those who had brought her here. He was younger, with a nervous energy about him, as he quickly closed the door behind him. "Be quiet," he whispered, placing a finger to his lips as Rachel started to speak. "I'm here to help, but we don't have much time." "Who are you?" Rachel asked, her voice barely audible. "My name is Mavi," he replied, glancing anxiously at the door. "I work here, but I can't do this anymore. I can't let them kill another child." The name struck a chord in Rachel's memory. "Mavi, you were on the cruise with us? Douglas Kearns said his partner backed out. That was you, wasn't it?" He nodded, shame evident in his expression. "I was supposed to help him take both your daughters, but when I saw them, a twin, I couldn't go through with it. I told Douglas to call it off, but he—" Mavi swallowed hard. "He decided to proceed alone. He killed one of your daughters because I refused to help with two." Rachel stared at him, a mixture of hatred and desperate hope warring within her. This man had been part of the plan that destroyed her family, yet now he was offering help when no one else would. "Why are you helping us now?" she demanded. "Because I'm a coward," Mavi said simply. "After that day on the cruise, I tried to run away, but Leo's men found me. They said I was still useful at the factory, even if I was too soft-hearted for field work." He looked directly at Rachel. "I've been living with what happened to your daughters every day since. When I saw you and Rayleigh being brought through the printing area, I knew it could only mean the worst." "They're going to kill her," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "They're drugging her and taking pictures, and then they're going to kill her." "I know," Mavi said grimly. "That room you saw on the screen, they only use it for children they're done with. They even have an incinerator here. They can make people just disappear." "Help me get to her," Rachel pleaded. "Please." Mavi shook his head. "We can't, not alone. There are too many armed men between us and the studio, but I have a plan." He reached into his pocket and produced a small flip phone. "Call the police. Tell them you're on Portsmouth Island. I'll get you to my truck. It's parked at the loading dock. You can hide there until help arrives." "But Rayleigh—" "The police will save her," Mavi insisted. "Leo won't kill her right away. He'll draw it out, maximize the profit from those photos. It's cruel, but it gives us time to bring help." Rachel wanted to argue, to insist they try to rescue Rayleigh immediately, but the rational part of her knew Mavi was right. The two of them, unarmed and with her still bound, had no chance against multiple armed men. "Okay," she agreed reluctantly. "Cut me free." Mavi produced a small pocket knife and carefully cut the zip ties binding her wrists. Rachel gasped as circulation returned fully to her hands, pins and needles shooting through her fingers. "I need to go," Mavi said, handing her the phone. "If anyone sees me here, I won't be able to help you. The loading dock is at the back of the building. Turn right when you leave this room instead of going back the way you came. Follow that corridor to the end, and you'll find a door that leads outside." "You're not coming with me?" "I'll meet you at the truck," he promised. "But we can't be seen together. My access card opens all the doors in this section. Go only when the corridor is clear." Rachel nodded, clutching the phone like a lifeline. "Thank you," she said quietly. Mavi's expression was grim. "Don't thank me. I'm part of the reason your family was destroyed. Just go, call for help, and maybe someday I'll be able to live with myself." He slipped out of the room, leaving the door unlocked behind him. Rachel immediately dialed 911, her fingers trembling so badly she had to try twice before getting the numbers right. "911, what's your emergency?" A dispatcher's voice came through the small speaker. "My name is Rachel Marin," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been kidnapped along with my daughter Rayleigh. We're being held on Portsmouth Island at some kind of printing facility. They're going to kill us. Please, send help immediately. And tell Detective Mace Alvarez he's been looking for us." The dispatcher remained calm and professional. "I'm dispatching units now, Mrs. Marin. Can you describe your exact location on the island?" "It's a warehouse-type building near a dock. They print magazines here," Rachel explained, not wanting to go into detail about what kind of magazines. "Please, tell them no sirens. They'll kill my daughter if they know police are coming." "I understand. Stay on the line if you can, Mrs. Marin." "I can't," Rachel replied. "I need to move, to try to get out of the building. Please, just hurry." She ended the call, tucking the phone into her pocket. Taking a deep breath, she cracked open the door and peered into the corridor. It was empty. Following Mavi's instructions, she turned right and began making her way toward what she hoped was freedom and help for Rayleigh. Rachel slipped out of the room, heart hammering against her ribs as she moved cautiously down the corridor. The building was eerily quiet now, the drone of the printing machines silenced for the night. Every few seconds, she paused to listen for footsteps or voices, pressing herself against the wall at the slightest sound. The corridor stretched ahead, its sterile fluorescent lighting casting harsh shadows. She moved as quickly as she dared, following Mavi's directions toward the loading dock. Each door she passed looked identical to the one where Rayleigh was being held, and the thought that her daughter was somewhere in this labyrinth of rooms, drugged and terrified, made her physically ill. Rachel was halfway to the exit when she heard footsteps approaching from around a corner ahead. She froze, looking frantically for somewhere to hide. The corridor offered no alcoves, no side doors within immediate reach. She was completely exposed. The footsteps grew louder. In seconds, whoever was coming would turn the corner and see her. Her eyes fell on a red metal box mounted on the wall nearby, a fire alarm station with a small glass-fronted compartment containing an emergency fire axe. Breaking the glass would set off an alarm, potentially creating chaos that could help her escape. But it would also alert everyone in the building to an emergency, possibly putting Rayleigh in greater danger if her captors decided to dispose of the evidence immediately. Rachel weighed her options in the seconds she had left. If she did nothing, she would certainly be caught. If she broke the glass, she might create a diversion. But at what cost to Rayleigh? As the footsteps reached the corner, Rachel tensed, preparing to make her move toward the fire axe, when suddenly a figure emerged from a side door she hadn't noticed and quickly subdued the approaching person. It was Mavi, and he had just taken down one of the facility's workers. "Quickly!" he hissed, dragging the unconscious man out of sight, "before someone else comes." Rachel hurried to join him, helping pull the worker into what appeared to be a supply closet. "Are you okay?" Mavi asked, securing the door behind them. Rachel nodded, her breathing ragged. "I called the police. They're on their way." "Good. We need to get you to the loading dock before anyone realizes you're gone." Mavi peered out of the closet, checking that the corridor was clear. "Follow me, and stay close." They moved swiftly through the remainder of the corridor, finally reaching a heavy metal door marked "Emergency Exit," with a warning that an alarm would sound if opened. "Won't that set off an alarm?" Rachel whispered. Mavi shook his head. "It's disabled during work hours to allow smoke breaks. They only activate it at night after the last shift leaves." He pushed the door open carefully, revealing a loading area with several trucks parked in a row. The night air was cool against Rachel's skin as they slipped outside. Mavi led her to a battered delivery truck with the logo of a mainstream magazine publisher on its side, clearly a front for the illegal operation inside. "Get in the back," he instructed, opening the rear doors to reveal a cargo area stacked with boxes. "Hide behind those. I need to drive to the front of the facility to meet the police when they arrive. No matter what happens to me, stay hidden until the police open the truck." Rachel climbed inside, maneuvering between tall stacks of boxes that she realized must contain the magazines produced inside. The thought that her daughter's exploitation was packaged in these very boxes made her stomach turn, but she forced herself to focus on the moment. "What if they stop you before you reach the police?" she asked, as Mavi prepared to close the doors. "Then you'll have to find another way," he said grimly. "But I think I can make it. The guards know me. I make deliveries regularly. They won't question me leaving at night." Before Rachel could say anything else, Mavi closed the doors, plunging her into darkness. A moment later, she heard him climb into the driver's seat, and the engine rumbled to life. The truck lurched forward, and Rachel braced herself against the boxes to avoid making noise as they shifted. Through a small gap in the rear doors, she could see the loading area receding as Mavi drove toward what she presumed was the main access road. The journey seemed agonizingly slow. Every bump in the road threatened to topple the stacks of boxes around her. Every pause made her wonder if they'd been stopped by security. She clutched Mavi's phone, prepared to call 911 again if necessary. After what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, the truck stopped. Rachel heard voices outside, Mavi speaking to someone, though she couldn't make out the words. Then, suddenly, there were more voices, authoritative ones, and the sound of car doors opening and closing. "Police! Step out of the vehicle with your hands up!" Rachel's heart leaped. They'd made it to the police checkpoint. More muffled conversation followed. Then the rear doors of the truck swung open to reveal several officers with weapons drawn, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. "Rachel Marin?" one called. "Yes!" Rachel scrambled forward, nearly falling in her haste to exit the truck. "I'm Rachel Marin. My daughter is still inside the facility. They're going to kill her." The officers helped her down from the truck, quickly moving her toward a police vehicle where an officer handed her a satellite phone. "It's Detective Alvarez," the officer explained. Rachel grabbed the phone. "Alvarez?" "Rachel, thank God." His voice was tight with tension. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, but Rayleigh is still in there," she said urgently. "They're drugging her, taking pictures, and then they're going to kill her. You have to get to her now." "We've got a tactical team assembling, and more backup is on the way, including helicopters," Alvarez assured her. "Stay where you are. You're safe now." "What about Mavi?" Rachel asked, looking around for the man who had helped her escape. "The driver?" "He's being detained for questioning. He says he worked for Barbos but was helping you escape." "That's true," Rachel confirmed. "He gave me his phone, helped me get out. He was supposed to work with Douglas Kearns to kidnap both my daughters from the cruise ship, but he backed out." There was a pause on the other end as Alvarez processed this information. "We'll sort that out later. Right now, our priority is getting Rayleigh safely out of that facility." Rachel watched as more police vehicles arrived, officers establishing a perimeter around the area while tactical team members prepared for entry. In the distance, she could hear the thumping of helicopter rotors approaching. "How did you find us so quickly?" she asked Alvarez. "We were already tracking your movements after you disappeared from the camping ground," he explained. "When your car was reported abandoned near an old dock, we narrowed our search to the surrounding waterways. Your 911 call confirmed the location, and we had units ready to move." Rachel was placed in the back of a police car, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders as a medic treated the cuts and bruises on her face and hands from her earlier fall. From the vehicle, she watched the police operation unfold with agonizing slowness. The minutes stretched into an hour as the tactical team methodically secured the perimeter of the facility. Workers began emerging from the building, hands raised, as police ordered them to lie face down on the ground for processing. Rachel strained to see each face, searching for any sign of Rayleigh or Barbos. Finally, she saw them, The men who had kidnapped her and Rayleigh being let out in handcuffs, followed by the tall man from the courtroom who had been watching them. And there, head bowed but unmistakable in his expensive suit, was Leo Barbos himself, flanked by 2 officers as he was escorted to a waiting police vehicle. But still, no Rayleigh. Rachel's anxiety mounted with each passing minute. Had they hidden her somewhere? Had they carried out their threat despite the police presence? Then she saw movement at the main entrance. Paramedics rushing into the building with a stretcher. Her heart seemed to stop, then race forward at a frantic pace. Minutes later, the paramedics emerged, the stretcher between them bearing a small figure. Even from a distance, Rachel recognized her daughter. Without thinking, she bolted from the police car, ignoring shouts to stay back as she ran toward the stretcher. "Rayleigh!" she cried, reaching the paramedics as they loaded the stretcher into an ambulance boat moored at the facility's dock. Rayleigh lay still, her eyes half closed, an IV already inserted in her arm. When she heard her mother's voice, she turned her head slightly, her gaze unfocused from the drugs still in her system. "Mom?" she murmured. "I'm here, sweetheart," Rachel said, grasping her daughter's hand. "I'm right here." One of the paramedics placed a gentle hand on Rachel's shoulder. "She's been heavily sedated, but her vital signs are stable. We need to get her to the hospital immediately." "I'm coming with her," Rachel stated, not a question, but a fact. The paramedic nodded. "Of course." As they prepared to depart, a police officer approached. "Mrs. Marin, we'll need your statement once you reach the mainland. The authorities there will coordinate with you." Rachel nodded absently, her focus entirely on Rayleigh. "What about Mavi, the man who helped me?" "He's being processed," the officer replied. "His situation is complicated, but given his role in rescuing you and potentially other victims, that will be taken into consideration." Rachel climbed into the ambulance boat beside her daughter, holding Rayleigh's hand as the vessel pulled away from the dock. Behind them, the island facility was now fully illuminated by police lights and helicopter spotlights, its secrets finally exposed to the outside world. As they crossed the dark water toward the mainland, Rachel stroked Rayleigh's hair, whispering reassurances she wasn't sure her daughter could hear through the haze of sedation. "It's over, Rayleigh," she murmured. "Really over this time. They can't hurt you anymore. We're going home." She didn't know yet where home would be or how they would rebuild their lives after all they had endured. But in that moment, with Rayleigh's hand in hers and the island of horrors receding behind them, Rachel allowed herself to feel the first genuine hope she'd experienced since that day on the cruise ship when her world had first shattered. The journey to the mainland took just over an hour. During the crossing, the paramedics worked diligently to stabilize Rayleigh, administering fluids to flush the sedatives from her system and monitoring her vital signs. They also attended to Rachel's injuries, the cuts and scrapes from her fall in the parking lot, the rope burns on her wrists, the bruising along her ribs where the van had struck her. Throughout the journey, Rachel maintained physical contact with her daughter, never letting go of Rayleigh's hand, even as the medics worked around her. Whenever Rayleigh's eyes fluttered open, confused and frightened, Rachel would lean close, assuring her they were safe. "We're going to the hospital, sweetheart," she explained during one such moment of lucidity. "The doctors are going to help you feel better." Rayleigh's response was slurred, the drugs still heavy in her system. "They took pictures? Bad ones?" "I know," Rachel soothed, stroking her daughter's hair. "But the police have those men now. They won't hurt you or any other children again." As the boat approached the mainland, Rachel could see flashing lights waiting at the dock, ambulances, police vehicles, and what appeared to be several unmarked government cars. The moment they docked, a team of emergency medical personnel swarmed the boat, transferring Rayleigh to a waiting gurney with practiced efficiency. "We're taking her to Cape Memorial Hospital," one informed Rachel. "It's the nearest facility with a pediatric emergency unit." Rachel climbed into the ambulance beside her daughter, grateful when the paramedics didn't insist she travel separately despite her own injuries. The ambulance sped through the quiet streets, sirens wailing into the night. At the hospital, Rayleigh was immediately brought to the emergency room, where a team of doctors and nurses converged around her, checking her condition and beginning treatment. Rachel was reluctantly led to a separate examination room, where her injuries were properly cleaned and bandaged. "You have a mild concussion and 3 bruised ribs," the doctor informed her after completing his examination. "Nothing broken, fortunately, but you'll be in pain for several days. I'd like to keep you overnight for observation." "I need to be with my daughter," Rachel insisted, already sliding off the examination table. The doctor seemed about to argue, then nodded in understanding. "I'll prescribe pain medication and have a nurse check on you periodically. But please, Mrs. Marin, don't push yourself too hard. Your daughter needs you healthy." Rachel thanked him, then made her way to the pediatric emergency unit where Rayleigh was being treated. A nurse directed her to a treatment room where she found her daughter connected to various monitors, an IV drip steadily feeding clear fluid into her arm. A female doctor was making notes on a chart nearby. "Mom," Rayleigh whispered when she saw Rachel, her voice stronger than it had been on the boat. Rachel approached the bed, carefully taking her daughter's hand. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." The doctor looked up, offering a sympathetic smile. "Mrs. Marin, I'm Dr. Lydia Chen, the pediatric emergency specialist on duty. Your daughter is stable, but I'd like to discuss her condition with you." Rachel nodded, not releasing Rayleigh's hand. "Of course." "The good news is that the sedatives they administered appear to be standard medical-grade drugs, not something more dangerous," Dr. Chen explained quietly. "We're flushing them from her system with IV fluids, and she should be fully alert by morning." "And the other effects?" Rachel asked, her voice dropping to ensure Rayleigh couldn't hear clearly. "The physical trauma?" Dr. Chen's expression grew more serious. "We've completed a thorough examination. There are ligature marks on her wrists and ankles consistent with restraints, and some bruising on her arms and legs from rough handling. She's significantly underweight and showing signs of long-term stress and malnutrition, but those are issues we were already addressing from her previous captivity." The doctor hesitated, then continued in an even softer voice. "We've found no evidence of sexual assault, if that's what you're asking. The exploitation appears to have been limited to photography." Rachel closed her eyes briefly, a wave of relief washing over her. At least Rayleigh had been spared that particular horror. "We'd like to keep her for at least 48 hours, Dr. Chen continued. "Not just for physical recovery, but also to begin psychological assessment. This second trauma coming so soon after her initial rescue, it's going to require specialized care." "Whatever she needs," Rachel agreed. "Just tell me how I can help her." Dr. Chen squeezed her shoulder gently. "Being here is the most important thing you can do right now. Your presence reassures her that she's safe." As the doctor left to check on other patients, Rachel pulled a chair close to Rayleigh's bedside, settling in for the night. Behind her, a police officer stood guard at the door, a precaution that Rachel found both reassuring and heartbreaking. Even here, in a hospital surrounded by people, they couldn't yet feel completely safe. Rayleigh drifted in and out of sleep, occasionally murmuring words that Rachel couldn't quite catch. Each time she stirred, Rachel would lean close, stroking her hair and whispering reassurances until she settled again. Near midnight, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Detective Alvarez, looking exhausted but determined. He spoke briefly with the officer on duty before approaching Rachel. "How is she?" he asked quietly, nodding toward Rayleigh's sleeping form. "Recovering," Rachel replied. "The drug should wear off by morning. Physically, she'll be okay." Alvarez nodded, pulling a second chair alongside Rachel's. "I know this isn't the best time, but I thought you'd want an update on what's happening." Rachel straightened, fully alert despite her exhaustion. "Please." "We've secured the entire facility on Portsmouth Island," Alvarez began. "Leo Barbos and 12 others are in custody, including the men who kidnapped you and Rayleigh. We've seized all the printing equipment, computers, and distribution materials, along with financial records that should help us track down others involved in the network." "What about the children?" Rachel asked. "Rayleigh mentioned there were others." "We found 8 children being held at a house close to the factory after a tip from Mavi," Alvarez confirmed grimly. "Ages 7 to 12, some reported missing as long as 2 years ago. They're receiving medical attention now, and we're contacting their families." Rachel closed her eyes briefly, imagining the reunions that would soon take place. Other parents experiencing the same overwhelming relief she had felt when she found Rayleigh at the ferry terminal months ago. "And Mavi?" she asked. "The man who helped me escape?" "Cooperating fully," Alvarez said. "He's provided names, dates, locations, information that will be invaluable in dismantling what remains of this network. He'll face charges, but his assistance and the fact that he saved your life will be considered during sentencing." Rachel nodded, conflicted about the man who had both contributed to her family's destruction and helped save what remained of it. "What about Barbos? What's he saying?" Alvarez's expression hardened. "Not much yet, but with the evidence we've seized and the testimony of those willing to talk, he's facing multiple life sentences. He won't see the outside of a prison again." Rachel felt a grim satisfaction at that. It wouldn't bring Millie back or erase what Rayleigh had endured, but at least the man who had orchestrated so much suffering would spend the rest of his life confined, just as he had confined his victims. Rachel looked at Rayleigh's sleeping form, a surge of fierce pride swelling in her chest. Even after everything she had endured, her daughter's courage had made a difference, not just for herself, but for countless others. "When can we go home?" she asked, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. "Not for a while yet," Alvarez admitted. "There will be more statements to give, identifications to make, potentially more testimony as we build cases against everyone involved. But we'll make it as easy on both of you as possible. You've both been through an unimaginable ordeal," Alvarez said. He stood, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You should rest. I'll have officers stationed outside around the clock." After Alvarez left, Rachel settled more comfortably in her chair, keeping her hand on Rayleigh's. Despite the pain from her injuries and the hard plastic of the hospital chair, she soon drifted into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in months, secure in the knowledge that the people who had torn apart her family were finally facing justice.